Hello and welcome back. Yes, welcome back. Very good to see you. Bookwormy and I are here on this beautiful Wednesday. We're reading inside because it's really a little windy out and you might not be able to hear our voices, but we're here with our cat Mimi. Here's Mimi. And we're ready to read a little bit more of Down the Swale. Now, if you remember yesterday, the heron had just dropped Brogden off on the island. He was a little disappointed that Brogden was not a fish, and Brogden told him, I owe you my life. But the bird just took off. Speaking of cool birds, this morning, flying around Lake Mohawk, I saw a bald eagle. It was so magnificent and so thrilling. I tried to get my phone to take a picture, and by the time I got there, it had flown away, but it was super cool. So hopefully you're on the lookout for some great birds near your house. Let's read a little bit more. Yes, let's read a little bit more of the tasty story. Thank you, Bookwormy. The flight and the flapping had dried Brogden's clothes, and his hair was only slightly damp now. Invigorated and hungrier than ever, he realized he needed to find something to eat. He tried to ignore the fact that he was even farther from home than ever. Once he had eaten something, he would come up with a plan to get himself off the island and head back. At least that's what he told himself. He got a good look at the island's layout when he was in the air. There was one single house right in the center. Several paths ran away from it in different directions and ended at smaller beaches on either side. He also saw a mixture of colors on the western part of the island: white, pink, purple, yellow. He assumed they were masses of flower blossoms, and blossoms could only mean one thing: berries. They might not all be ripe yet, but at least they'd be something. Think about the kind of berries you like to eat. I like raspberries. He paused, excuse me. He paused for a moment and watched his shadow stretch away from his body. It was a trick Aunt Hazel had taught him so that he would be able to get his bearings. After studying the shadow's position for a moment, he headed west through the grass. About 10 feet on, Brogden came to a bush with dark green, waxy, oval-shaped leaves. The edges of the leaves curved upward and inward. Brogden recognized it as a drinking bush, which Aunt Hazel had taught him to identify when he was only 4 or 5 years old. Sure, she had said it was a plant that could save someone's life, and sure enough, when he gently pulled one of the leaves off, he found a sizable amount of water sitting in the middle of it. He raised it to his lips and drank gratefully. His stomach thanked him with a rumble. That also reminded him that solid food would be appreciated even more. He continued westward until the land sloped downward. The grass gave way to a rocky path, which he followed for quite some time. Then he came upon 3 cherry trees whose white blossoms covered the ground. Brogden approached the first tree and studied its bark. There didn't seem to be any decent footholds or branches jutting out, so he moved on to the next tree. 2 squirrels were playing a game of round the trunk, in which one of the squirrels covers their eyes and counts to 5, giving the other squirrel a head start to climb the tree. The first squirrel goes up the tree after counting and tries to catch the second squirrel's tail. The running and chasing continues up and down the tree, around and around, sometimes for hours. Not wanting to interrupt the fun the squirrels were having, Brogden moved on to the third tree. This one had several bumpy knots protruding from its trunk, and Brogden was able to climb up to a branch about 4 or 5 feet above the ground. It was small, thick, and sturdy, and he rested on it for a moment. It held his weight easily. From there, he looked up and was thrilled to see clusters of tiny berries hanging down from branches above. He dug his toes into more knobby knots and reached up to grab a higher branch. Pulling himself up with both arms, he swung up and wrapped them around the branch until he was hanging like a monkey. Finally, he flipped over onto the top of the branch and sat down. He plucked a handful of berries, and it took all of his willpower not to shove the whole cluster into his mouth at once. But Aunt Gladys's voice popped into his mind. Proper digestion begins with proper chewing, she always said. So he plucked off the ripest of the berries and bit off small chunks. The taste was terribly sour, but he didn't mind. Within seconds, the berry was gone, except for the pit. Dropping the pit, he yelled, Look out below! He kept this up as he devoured many berries, even those that were so sour they made his lips pucker and eyes squint. With his belly full, Brogden was now ready to formulate a plan. The branch he was sitting on was still too low to see very far, so he continued climbing higher and higher until he had a better view of the island. To the east was the house, and it didn't look as nearly as nice as from the air. He also could see 3 rocky paths which led to the beaches, one being the path he had just followed. 2 docks and a boathouse were also visible, but since he was not looking down at them, he couldn't tell how many boats, if any, were inside it. The boathouse was the most promising thing he'd seen so far. The house dwellers occupying the crumbly old house would have to leave the island at some point. As soon as they did, he would stow away in their boat and bum a ride to the mainland. Yes, he decided, a boat is definitely the key to getting home. So he decided to begin the search for one at once. He shimmied down the tree trunk and walked along the stone path until he came to a beach. There were no boats of any kind there. He strolled across the sand to the water's edge, where a clump of cattails were sprouting up, and clouds of gnats spun upon the water's surface. Below them, the lake was still and green. Large patches of algae spread out in fuzzy, floating masses. But since there were no boats here, he decided to move on. As he turned to leave, however, he heard voices. It's probably just a rumor, said the first one. Well, even if it is true, you can't go by appearances alone, said a second. There was a moment of silence, and Brogden wondered if perhaps he'd been mistaken, if it had been just the wind or something. But then he heard them again. And anyway, there's no proof of anyone being hurt, said the first voice. So far as we know, said the second. True, true, said the first. And then there was silence. Brogden gazed all around, but he didn't see a single soul. Just a few bubbles breaking on the surface of the water near the cattails. And then he remembered what Aunt Hazel had told him about fish talk. Fish carry on their conversation in bubbles underneath the water, she said. The words float on up to the surface in the bubbles, and then pop! The bubbles burst. The words drift out into the open air, and anyone in the surrounding area can hear them. That's why you must never tell a fish anything personal. It could become the gossip of the town. Brogden told her she didn't have to worry. He didn't think he'd ever have the opportunity to talk to a fish. And even if he did, he didn't have any deep, dark secrets that anyone would be interested in knowing anyway. This must be fish talk, he thought. He walked closer to the water's edge and waited. Sure enough, more bubbles rose to the surface and popped, and he could hear the fish words plain as day. Well, what he saw was definitely scary, said the second voice. A long neck, large body, big tail, and big teeth, too. Lots of them. Definitely not like anything he'd ever seen before in these waters. Water snakes, stated the first voice quite confidently. Not likely, the second argued. The body was too big. But whatever it was, I'm not taking any chances. I'm staying on this side of the island. I think you're overreacting, the first one said. Until I see something with my own eyes, I refuse to believe that we're in danger here in Lake Wahakmo. Danger? Brogden repeated in his mind. Danger? He gasped and thought back to the croaking frogs from the night before, and about Amy questioning Varric about a monster in the lake. Could all of these incidents Be related? He waited for more bubbles to break, but the water remained still. The fish must have moved on. A chill ran up and down his spine, and a layer of goosebumps rose on his arms. What if there really was some dangerous creature in the lake? He remembered his jump off the boat and near drowning, and he shuddered. All he wanted now, more than anything he'd ever wanted before, was to get off the island and get back to his hut. He would spend the rest of the days, he vowed to himself, staying as far away from Lake Wahakmo as possible. Do you really think there's something dangerous in the waters? I don't know, Bookwormy. The only way we can find out if there is danger in Lake Wahakmo is to keep on reading. You're absolutely right. So please join us tomorrow so we can continue. Down the swale. Down the swale. We can't wait to see you. Please come back. Bye, everybody.